are you living these quarantine days, first of all?
Uh, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, I'm sort of walking around the house a lot, sighing loudly. I'm sort of trying to work, but quite a lot of stuff obviously is not cancelled, but is like postponed. So we were going to start Sex Education 3 like at the end of this month. And so that's been postponed. I don't know when that's going to be shooting again. So I've got 2 jobs on at the moment. I'm just trying to stretch those out as much as I can.
But do you think that this coronavirus will affect your work in the short term or in the long term or not?
Short term, it'll be okay. And by short term, I mean sort of the next couple of months. The next couple of months, it'll be okay. It'll be more difficult if it goes on for much longer than that. Then let me see now. I've got 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 projects which we're going to start filming, which I don't know then if they film this year, and then stuff that was filming that has stopped. So 2 things that were filming that are now that had stopped. I'm hopeful that it'll be sort of like that things will get a little bit back to normal by July. I mean, who knows? It's insane. The whole thing's insane. But
It
anyway.
is something never seen. So I read that you started working as a music supervisor by accident, really, because you didn't know there was such a job. Were you a musician before or just an avid listener?
A bit of both. I played guitar ever since I was a kid. I've just always just really been into music. I just always have. Do you know what I mean? I never really I never tried to learn much about it or anything like that. I'm not very good at retaining information, but music information I'm good at. Don't know why. And my dad used to record me at the Old Grey Whistle Test, which was an old show that was around in the 70s here in England, 70s and 80s. There was a guy called Bob Harris was the presenter of that, and they had like Little Feat and Captain Beefheart and Tim Buckley and Roxy Music and all sorts on that show, all playing live. And I used to watch that. So my dad, for reasons known only to himself, used to record it for me, even though I was probably 6 or 7. And I used to watch that, and I just really loved it. So I don't have any qualifications other than experience now, for doing it, and like I say, when I started, which was I think it was 95. My boss thinks it was 96 when I started at Airedale. I'd never heard of music supervision. I just wanted to get in the music business somehow. I think I wanted to be an A&R man, actually. And I thought what I would do was I would sort of start at Airedale, and that would be a stepping stone to being in the music industry. And then I would work at a record company or a publisher or something like that.
So you never tried to make it in the music business as a musician?
Like I used to play in bands and stuff like that, and that was like fun. But I think you have to know your limits. I think more musicians that actually are musicians should know their limits, and sometimes just sort of go, right, we've maybe only got this album, and that's enough.
And do you think that the music clearance process has changed through the years from when you started, or is it mainly the same?
Well, we don't work on fax anymore. So when I did Snatch, I had 5 files that were like that thick of clearance requests and all that kind of stuff. My correspondence. So, and you used to have to stay at the office really late because, you're sort of dealing with, people in LA and all that kind of stuff. So there was none of, all that. and that kind of thing. It's the same in the, there's still not quite enough. They never quite give you enough money to do the clearances. We sort of start our negotiations, and the number is too small, and then the record company or the publisher comes back saying they want more money. The main difference is the subscription services, so Netflix and Apple and all that. I would say that's been the major change, and probably the biggest problem that I always have is the record companies sometimes go, well, this is a Netflix show, so therefore you need to be offering sort of 5 times what you're offering because it's a Netflix show. And I have to explain that, like with the end of the fucking world, like Netflix ultimately broadcast it, but it's actually a co-production with Channel 4. So Channel 4 pay for it. You start off, we start off at 20 grand an episode to try and clear the songs, and then we go over a little bit on some episodes, but generally I had a little bit the same with Sex Education as well, particularly at the start of season 2, because they were like, well, it's a really successful show, therefore, people are going to expect much more money. I had to do a lot of work to basically persuade them that I still didn't have very much money. And then, and then you sort of get to a thing where actually sort of, people want to be in it, so that sort of helps. But, a lot of people just assume that because it's Netflix, we've got the same as like Stranger Things, which I think is $9 million an episode, or The Crown, which is $13 million an episode. So like the end of the fucking world is 750. That they make each episode for well under $1 million. Sex Education they make for just over $1 million per episode. So I'm always having to, just have that argument.
And about the end of the fucking world, I personally admire the thing that you only inserted in the episodes music from the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Yes.
So is that a concept you decided, or was it something decided together with the director?
It's always a collaboration. At its best, it is a collaboration, and it's and it's the director and it's the producers and it's me. I think with the end of the fucking world, the main thing that Jonathan sort of said at the start of season 1 was that it was going to look very ambiguous. So you weren't going to really be able to place where it was. It was going to like look American, but it was going to be still pretty English. And the humor would be pretty English. And also, I mean, actually, so John and Chuck, Charles, who did the comic, who did the original, comic, they had a massive Spotify playlist, that was probably 700 songs that they'd been sort of batting back and forth over like 5 years, because it took them 5 years to get the show made. And there was a few songs that made it that were in that original playlist that made it into the show. Loads of them we couldn't afford. And then the thing that just sort of developed as a sort of result of that, because we had so little money, there were 2 things. First of all, I started finding by accident loads of doo-wop, because it turns out that you could clear that for like $1,000 a side. So a lot of the doo-wop started making its way in there, and fortuitously that worked really well, because there's something quite histrionic about that doo-wop stuff that works really well with when you've got like 2 OKs and a shit, which is sometimes all the dialogue is. So like with James, for example, James is so blank, at the start of the show, he's so blank that sort of very, very super expressive music works amazingly well, and also like the 50s is definitely the dawn of the teenager, and the end of the fucking world at its heart is like a teenage road movie thing. you know, but the great thing about all that music from the 50s is that like that was the first time that those kids, that like teenagers, were like having their lives like explained to them properly. You know, like before they only had like Al Martino and Patti Page and all that kind of stuff, and you know, and then all of a sudden all this other stuff is happening, and it's like, oh, okay, now I sort of understand all these weird feelings that I'm sort of getting and all that kind of stuff. And that was the first time that was happening. So that was sort of then. And then the other thing is that I divide it into two halves, and actually it was shot in two halves. It was shot, so there was block 1, episodes 1 to 4, and then block 2, episodes 5 to 8. And then what you notice is that the music starts changing a bit after episode 4, as they start changing, and as Alyssa starts feeling more like herself, as James starts having feelings and all that kind of stuff. So that's why you start getting like the Buzzcocks and Shuggy Otis and all that kind of stuff, you know. But, you know, again, as a music supervisor, you know, sort of like you're not like all the songs in the show are not all yours. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, there'll be some that I put forward, some that we work up when we see the scene, some that the editor will put in, some that, like, you know, the director will really want. Sometimes you hate that song, but they love it, and you can't understand why they love it. But, you know, and ultimately, like, you know, it works at its best when it is a collaboration. You know, like Lucy Cherniak, who did block 2 of The End of the Fucking World. She also had, you know, it worked really well actually, because she had a much different sensibility to John, and so together, in conjunction with Ed and Andy, the producers, and Charlie, who wrote the scripts and everything, it sort of, you know, it just sort of evolved. But it was really, in the grand scheme of things, it was quite easy. You know, like there wasn't very much arguing about anything really. It, like, everything just slotted in quite nicely. It's not always like that, but in that case, you know, also because I think that there was no pressure in terms of, we all thought we were making a very, very tiny show that 12 people would see, and it would get like an excellent review in The Guardian.
Okay.
And that would be, you know, and that would sort of more or less be it. We thought that, like, not a lot of people would see it, but the people who did see it would really like it. As a result of that, it was quite easy because, you know, we were just like, well, you know, this feels right. If you're making a show about teenagers, right? Okay, you never ever say or go, right, okay, what we're going to do is we're just going to put loads of really obscure music from the 50s in that nobody knows. Like, nobody says that's a good idea. If you're doing something about teenagers, you research the demographic, you liaise with the record companies, you know, you get priority acts for the last quarter of the year so that there's synergy and all that kind of stuff, you know. So we didn't have any of that. So we were just allowed to do what we wanted. And then the other thing from having not a lot of money was that then I was like, well, we need somebody to do some more music. So that's why I suggested Graham Coxon.
So you suggested him.
Yes, yeah. I emailed John and said, well, first of all, I spoke to the producer and said, look, I think you are going to need somebody to do some music, and like Graham Coxon would be really good. And I'd worked with him before. And she was like, yeah, okay, well, just email John. So I emailed John, and I sort of did a bit of a selling thing. And I didn't realize that John was like a massive fan. And he just sent me an email back saying, love, in capital letters, just one word.
Okay.
And we had a meeting, I think the week later, in a department store in Brixton, at a Cafe Nero, at this department store in Brixton, and that went really well. Graham loved the script, you know. The whole idea behind Graham is like, you know, is that thing about it's a British show, but there has to be an American kind of sensibility. I thought, I mean, Graham's done that, like, you know, that's his whole thing, is basically sort of taking all sorts of genres and stuff like that, and, you know, like force feeding Damon loads of like obscure American, you know, alt rock in the mid 90s and stuff.
Yeah, he's kind of like the British Beck.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's like the British, you know, a lot of the slide guitar and everything like that, you'll notice that there's little folky inflections that are more like a bit like Bert Jansch or John Renbourn or stuff like that, that you wouldn't get from an American slide guitarist. Paris Essex, we called it. Was like when we sort of landed on it, it was like, yeah, it's like Paris Essex. So it's a bit like Ry Cooder, if Ry Cooder was from Colchester.
Yeah.
And then for season 2, that changed. I don't know if you noticed, but there was a bit more folk in it, certainly in the songs, but then also in some of his cues. There's all sorts in it, because obviously that's what Graham does, you know, it's just whatever comes into his mind.
I thought that in season 1 the music was a little more playful, and in season 2 sort of more mature in his sounds. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, because, you know, also we kind of he had a much better idea of what the show was. I think he wrote like that song, like The Things She Knows, It's the Things She Knows. Like, he wrote that before he even read any of the scripts for season 2. He just sort of wrote it, and he thought, oh, that sounds quite end of the fucking worldish. So he just sort of kept it back, you know. So, you know, yeah, he had a much better idea. You know, like I said, we both had a much better idea of what it was at that point, you know.
And what was the most expensive song you had to sing to the show?
It was Smile. It was Timmy. It was that Timmy Euro recording of Smile. Actually, that was more expensive than Fleetwood Mac.
I would have guessed Bob Dylan, Wigwam.
Oh no! Actually, no. We paid less for Wigwam than we paid for Smile in season 1.
How did the work for Sex Education differed from The End of the Fucking World?
So the whole thing about Sex Education was that Ben Taylor and Eleven and Laurie Nunn. So basically Ben Taylor and Laurie Nunn and one of the early producers, Sean, they had basically sold it to Netflix on the whole. So on the look of it, you know, like, again, it's like a sort of, you know, American high school movie, you know, but it's
still British, yes.
There is that commonality, I suppose, between the two. But two other things as well was that, you know, it was a love letter to John Hughes, right? Front and center. And number two, again, Ben had already at that point totally fallen in love with Ezra Furman, and they'd spoken to Ezra. Ezra was already on board.
Okay.
And so the commonality is that you are trying to create your own world, right? The thing about Sex Education is that there is no like cinema verite version of that show. Without the costume, without the look, without the music, without all sorts of things, you know, it just becomes very dull and worthy, and, you know, nobody would enjoy watching it, you know. So that, you know, you need all these different elements to make it fun enough so that people are taking it, because, you know, as much as it was fun, the serious element behind it is basically to help teenagers, you know, so, you know, is to open up dialogue for teenagers for all these very complicated things that they go through, and that there isn't enough dialogue around it. So there was this very serious thing underneath it. And then, of course, my problem is that I have to persuade everybody. I have to persuade the Irving Berlin estate, or, you know, the Ella Fitzgerald estate, that it's not just
about sex.
yeah, that it's not just pornographic, right? So it was a bit of a knife edge. Some people were very, very undecided, and we get denied. We got denied a lot in season one, because like the scene descriptions as well. If you read some of the scene descriptions, you'd be just like, no,
Okay.
Like I'd have to drop an email to like the head of Sony ATV and say, look, dude, we've got to have a phone conversation. Because otherwise, if you just get that out of the blue, it's just like, what the fuck? Do you know what I mean? So, but and like I say, a lot of people didn't get it, didn't understand it, and we got denied by the same artist twice, once on season one, once on season two. Like they're just not having it. We're like, keep trying. They're just, but so those are the similarities, I think.
Okay, yeah. And I thought that the scene with I Touch Myself was just perfect.
When I saw that, I rang up Ben, the director, and I said, you have made the best 3 minutes of TV that have ever been made, ever,
It was
in the history of TV.
so funny and also revealing to me because I didn't experience those things as a teenager.
Exactly. But that's a perfect example of like, we need to have I just need to explain to you like what happened in season one. How that happened in season one. Well, now basically he can't stop. Blah blah, all this kind of stuff. And I think actually, if I hadn't have made that call, probably would have got denied from the get-go, because like when you read the scene description, it reads like the most awful thing in the world. The other thing about sex education generally is that from a musical perspective, it's like a shit fight. So basically it's like the editors. There are 3 editors. They all have slightly different preferences musically. Then there's like John Jennings, producer, Ben Taylor, the other 2 directors for like season 2, Alice Seabright and Sophie Goodhart, and then a couple of other people, and then me and Kira, my assistant. And basically, it's sort of like I'll look at it and I'll be like, they put fucking Rod Stewart in. I can't believe it. And then I'll be speaking to Ben and I'll be going like, Ben, what do you think? And like Ben's like, I hate Rod Stewart, but that could be good. If we can get some of the other stuff out, then I think we can probably keep Rod Stewart, because like there is something weirdly, sort of amazing about how that song works. So it'd be like, okay, well, I'll have a go. I sent loads of alternatives for Rod Stewart, but like nothing was quite working. But the thing is that episode then was too much of this particular editor, so we had to sort of like de-editorize it basically, so that there was a bit more of a balance of like what if Ben's stuff, my stuff, and then Steve's stuff, and it works brilliantly, like. So again, going back to collaboration, it's like like Steve Aykroyd, who's one of the editors, is really mainstream. He's like more mainstream than I would ever be. I'm way too much of a snob to like think about some of the stuff that Steve was. But that's the genius of it, because you need a bit of Steve in there to counteract my snobbishness. And then Ben wants to be surprised, and then Ben just wants to know that like we've always got the best song for the best thing. So sometimes I might send him 5 songs for a particular scene, something that he loves, right? He already loves the song that's there, but all he wants to know is just like, well, are we sure that that is the best song? So I'll send him 5 songs, and he might kind of go, I quite like one of those that you sent, but it still isn't as good as Rod Stewart or whatever. So there is no stone left unturned, basically. And then there's stuff that I really disagree with. Like, I'm ashamed to say, I really 100% disagreed with Sufjan Stevens in episode 7, The Mystery of Love.
I was going to ask you about that too, because that song is attached to the movie for which it was
Exactly.
made.
Exactly. That's what I thought as well. I was just like, can't use this. It's so synonymous with, Call Me by Your Name and everything like that. Then I realised that Eric would love that film. And of course he would be listening to the soundtrack, because that scene is bookended by, so it's obviously Gillian Anderson coming out of the bedroom and sort of having a little heart palpitation. But we're mostly on Eric. And then it goes on to whatever the thing after Eric is. But really, the focus of that scene is Eric. And of course he would love Call Me by Your Name. Then it's legitimate. It's completely, like, I was so against it until I realised that it was true to Eric. And actually, weirdly, it's probably the most popular song in the show.
Really? You think that?
Yeah. It's the one that has been tweeted about the most. 100%. Yeah.
Changing the subject, I know that you're very proud of forming the supergroup for Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire.
Who wouldn't?
That was truly majestic. But how did you make that happen?
So the first conversations you have is, what do wizards sing about, and how are we going to get those songs written? Is the person that's going to write the song, is that person then going to perform in it? There are all these kind of things, but the main thing was you get the song written. The process was, we spoke to Jarvis Cocker and two other very well-known artists, and it just was Jarvis, like, he wasn't doing very much at that point. Obviously he's a great songwriter and he loved the books, and we kind of knew once we'd spoken to him that he would be amazing. His manager called me, I think actually 2 days after we met with Jarvis, and he'd written 4 songs and 3 of those ended up in the film. So then he did a demo. I really liked Mike Hedges as a producer, because I just really liked what he'd done with McCalmont and Butler, and he'd worked with The Cure and people like that. Mike was on board, so now we had a producer. So Jarvis did some demos with Steve Mackey, who's the bass player from Pulp, Mike Hedges, Warren Ellis, who plays with Nick Cave, was on those original demos. And the drummer was the guy who played with McCalmont and Butler, whose name I can't remember. So then we had the demos, right? Okay, and then so those went to David Heyman, David Barron, Mike Newell, who was the director. They had some very minimal comments. Then Jarvis is like, I'd love to be in the film. So that's fine. Okay, so Jarvis and Steve, we've got that. But what we don't have is a guitar player or a drummer. Weirdly, I had Graham Coxon on my list, but Graham did not get on with Damon Albarn at that point, and we had spoken to Damon about writing the songs, so that kind of couldn't happen. I think somebody like, for a laugh, said, let's ask Johnny Greenwood, and we were like, yeah, we're really going to get the guitarist and Radiohead to sort of, do this. But, I was sort of like, well, what the hell? We'll ask. Okay, so I rang up Radiohead's management company. The guy I needed to speak to wasn't there, but I sort of left a message saying, I need to speak to him about this Harry Potter film and Johnny Greenwood. And he called back within 5 minutes and said, well, look, you're in luck, because Johnny loves the films, Johnny loves the books, and he's totally bored because one of the band was having a baby and they were on hiatus, And then he said, oh, by the way, do you need a drummer? Because Philip's bored as well. So I was just like, no, that's fine. So I put the phone down, and then we had a band, And I was just like, oh my God, like, that's weird. So we sent the demos to Johnny and Philip. And then I think a week later, they were in the studio and they recorded those songs like in a day. They'd never played together before, but they just bashed them out in a day. And then I think they were mixed in over 2 days. And then that was that. And then in between all that, they're like going to Leavesden to the wardrobe department to be fitted with their costumes and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it was amazing.
Yeah, it was.
It was really amazing.
But how did you got to know Graham Coxon and also Jarvis Cocker?
Well, I'll tell you why. So basically, also, my boss, Maggie, had worked with Jarvis. So Maggie Rodford, who is my boss, had done a film called Great Expectations for Alfonso Cuarón. Patrick Doyle was the composer. Pulp had written a song for that, and like Maggie was really impressed by Jarvis. And actually, I think it was definitely Maggie that sort of said, you know what, you should definitely think about Jarvis for this because he is really great. And you know, over the course of probably 8 months, by the time from sort of start to finish. So yeah, you know, you sort of build up a sort of relationship. I mean, if I see Jarvis now, he'll recognise me and we'll say hello and stuff like that. Graham, I started working with him for a show that I did called Fresh Meat, and we needed somebody to write a really insane song, and I just thought, oh, Graham Coxon's got to be, you know. And it turned out he was just a really big fan of the show, so he wrote this song, but we actually ended up becoming friends because we're quite similar in quite a lot of ways. So he's a mate now, and we text a lot because he's over in LA and stuff. So, you know, we always sort of get together for a Thursday afternoon cup of tea sometimes, you know, and he's lovely, Graham, and he's really super collaborative as well.
I thought that. I just got to see No Distance Left to Run, so I'm really happy to talk to you about Graham as well.
How Graham is in the film, that is how he is in real life. He is slightly bewildered about life, basically. He's, oh, blimey, you know, so.
Okay. Is there any other music supervisor that you truly admire?
Oh God, loads, you know. Thomas Golubic, who does Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad. Like, I always credit Breaking Bad with, I think, allowing music supervisors or freeing them from just well-known pop songs, you know. Alex Patsavas, you know, who used to do the OC, and, you know, she does Grey's Anatomy and all that kind of stuff, you know. Nora Felder, who does Stranger Things and What We Do in the Shadows, you know. Robin Erdang, who does Mrs. Maisel, which is phenomenal, you know. Manish Raval, who did Girls, and all of the, you know, because the other thing is that, you know, being from the UK, you kind of look at those people as, you know, Hollywood music supervisors. And it's like, oh my God, they're making like proper, like big, like LA stuff. Do you know what I mean? It's like you look up to them a bit, you know. And we all kind of follow each other on Twitter as well. So, and I think that's the other thing as well, is that, you know, being from the UK 5 years ago, you know, if you worked on a TV show, like it was really only shown in the UK and it wasn't really an international thing. And now with Netflix, our work becomes international, you know. So all of a sudden we sort of find ourselves on the same footing, if you like, on the same platforms, you know, which is great, you know, and we all have the same problems. None of us have enough money, difficult scenes to clear for, and unreasonable expectations by, you know, all this kind of stuff. It's the same for all of us, you know. And it's good to know that you kind of like, you know, you can just sort of like send a tweet and sort of get a supportive thing back saying like, oh, dude, I so know what you're going through, you know.
Which is the latest film or TV show that struck you, musically speaking?
Chernobyl. There's not a lot of songs in it or anything like that. Just the score, I was just like, whoa, this is a bit different. This is before I knew that like Hilda had like sampled an actual nuclear reactor. So, you know, did you know that? So a lot of that score is actually the sampled sound of a reactor. So you get this drone and then it sort of ever so slightly shifts in pitch, but it's not an actual musical tone that it goes, like it doesn't go like a quarter tone, or it goes like a third and a half of a tone down or something like that. It's like, whoa, you know, like what's going on there. So that I think is pretty extraordinary. Euphoria was good.
Yeah.
And then I obviously I liked I'm Not Okay With This because, you know, it was Jonathan and, you know, Nora Felder did a great job. You know, Graham's Blood Witch thing was amazing. So, you know, yeah, you know, I thought that was pretty ace.
And what is your way to find new music these days?
I mean, I do get sent a lot. I ask, sometimes I just ask that, you know, if I need something specific, I'll ask the record companies and the publishers. So like when I start like Sex Education, for example, I'll just ask for like, you know, right, I just need you to surprise me with all your most obscure 80s things and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes I hear it on the radio. Sometimes I don't use Spotify that much, but I do occasionally do a bit of a deep dive on Spotify and my brain, you know, because when I started, you know, there was no internet, so you had to remember everything. I literally just used to refer to, you know, like my memory and the Guinness Book of Hit singles was how when I started. So, you know, I still do that a little bit.
And do you have a production music library you prefer or not?
3. Yeah. I generally use Universal, KPM, and Extreme.
Okay. I'm happy to hear that.
Oh, sorry, 4. And Cavendish. KPM are my favourite just because of all what we used to call the brown sleeves and the green sleeves, you know, which, you know, those.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, exactly. Because they all sound like really authentic, you know, obscure bands from the 60s and 70s, you know, or like John Renbourn used to do stuff for KPM. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of that.
Okay, this last question is maybe you need more time to answer. I wanted to ask you if you could trace your career in 10 songs, which would they be?
Oh.
But if you want, you can write me down the answer on another time.
Yeah. That's quite interesting. But yes, I can tell you one of them for sure is "Oh Children" by Nick Cave.
For the Harry Potter.
Yeah, 100%. That would be in there. Leave that with me, please. Yeah, and I will, you know.
Thank you. Have a nice evening and good luck for everything.
Thank you so much. Cheers. Bye-bye.